You've reached the Signal Watch. Movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Signal Watch podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Justin Lincoln.
And Justin, we are covering Noir. Yay. We're enjoying what today?
This is Bone Snapper Straight Rye Whiskey.
And you described it as...
Well, I think it's a lot like this movie. So it's kind of light and bright. I thought the movie, for the most part, because I think when you think of noir, you tend to think of like dark shadows. Mm-hmm. And this movie certainly has it. But this movie's light, or this bourbon is light and bright, kind of like this movie, and a little hint of fruit in there, like Vincent Price.
So what we're covering today is 1944's Laura. Oh, that's quite good.
Yeah.
I quite like that. And I will be honest. I really like this movie. To contextualize it within the noir movement, it might actually be a year or two early for saying this is part of the noir movement, but it is definitely a noir. And by that I mean most of the time when we talk about noir, we're talking about movies that occurred after World War II and the disaffection that people were feeling. That said, Double Indemnity fell about this exact same time. So some of that was already creeping into the movies that were occurring during World War II. And so you just, anyway, I think it ends up impacting the movie in a few different ways, just from kind of a how did it get made aspect. One of the leads is an older gentleman, compared to his romantic interest, who's 30 years his junior. And originally they talked about casting Laird Krieger there, who probably was never going to qualify. He was going to be 4F going into World War II. So it just has a few of those things going on in it. And it kind of starts paving the way for some other movies that came later within the movement. But you said that this was the first time you'd seen it.
It is. I find that, I really like noir, but I definitely have some really big blind spots as far as like the classics. This was my first time seeing this. I'd say only within the last year did I see Out of the Past. Mm-hmm. And I really like this movie on the first watch, and I started rewatching it again this morning. It's a great movie. It's so incredibly well written and well acted. There's just, it's a lot of layers in this movie that I didn't quite expect. Yeah, and I felt like I didn't really even see until the second time around, which is always a joy when movies just get better and better as you watch them.
This is probably my fifth or sixth time to watch Laura. When I was going through my early, 20 years ago, checking out what is one supposed to watch in film noir. This is one of the ones that gets thrown out there as a staple, and so I watched it and kind of latched onto it. But it's been about 8 years, because I think the last time I watched this was I got a wild hair a few years ago and went to the Noir Fest in San Francisco at the Castro, and they showed this at that time. So I watched it with 1,000 of my closest friends or whatever at the Castro. And it was like, after that, I was like, well, I'm not going to top that experience. But when we were going through, one of the things you said was, I really like noir that follows like an obsession.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, we have multiple angles on that in a single movie. So, yeah, we should probably do Laura then. And if you've not seen it, the basic gist of the movie is a detective is called in after a young woman of great promise who's in the middle of World War II. They don't reflect too much on the fact. They never really reference the war in the movie. But she's making her way up the ad company's food chain that she's working in, and she's the... How do you say it? Kind of the girlfriend, sort of this columnist in New York. And you'll find this in a lot of movies from this era, where there's like a very powerful columnist of some sort. When newspapers were a really powerful thing in the media landscape, and. Anyway, she's been shot in the face with a shotgun and just found for dead. And this guy's trying to figure out what happened. And he's going around to the various people in her life to kind of do a Citizen Kane-esque, like, who was Laura? How would this have happened sort of thing. And Laura is played by Gene Tierney. This is kind of her signature role. And the detective is played by Dana Andrews. This is one of many of his signature roles. And you quite liked the guy who played Waldo Leidecker.
Oh yeah, he's really good, and really on a second watch, when you know how this film ends, and
we can spoil it's fine. If you want
he
to.
did it. I mean, he's such it. So. Let me back up a little. When we first started talking about noir, and I think I'm much more versed in modern noir, which I think a lot of the modern noir tends to throw a lot of social issues in there, whereas I never really associated this kind of classic noir. But, I mean, you could plop this movie in today, and it would work. I mean, he's such a... I don't even know what the right term is. I mean,
it is an acerbic wit.
Yeah, but I mean, he's such like a... I don't know if he's... I mean, he's almost like a troll of sorts. I mean, just the way he kind of ingrains himself into this woman that he's, lusting after is really interesting and very... toxic.
Yeah, he both elevates her. There's all these flashback sequences that he's actually telling the story of his relationship with Laura to Dana Andrews, and takes Dana Andrews to dinner at their favorite restaurant, and sits at their table and says, I met her. She was a young ad, employee, and she came to me with an idea, and I rejected it, and I felt bad about that, which it seems to be the first time he's ever felt bad about anything. And he never outright ever says that. He just says, then I appeared at her office and agreed to do the thing she wanted, which was endorse a pen. And then he then tells this tale of how he elevated her. And there's actually a cut scene on the DVD that apparently they removed in the middle of, because it's 1944, height of World War II. And they thought there was too much decadence shown in it, of him taking her to various soirees around New York and introducing her to the hoi polloi. And so you understand she has all these connections across the city now and all this. And they were like, yeah, we have people dying like by the hundreds of thousands right now. We can't really be showing people like, drinking champagne and wearing tuxedos. Yeah. So it's not the same as Depression era movie making. But I think Clifton Webb is an interesting choice for this role. Like I said, he's significantly older than Gene Tierney was at the time they filmed this. And one of the things I was reading in the trivia about the movie was he'd never really done movies before this. He'd done some during the silent era and then gone back to the stage. And they brought him out. I'm assuming, like I said, World War II, they're like scrambling for anyone who was, either too old to serve or 4F or whatever. And there's always times when you're watching movies made during this era going, well, why wasn't that dude picked up to go serve when they look, reasonably healthy? And like Danny Andrews, I have no idea how that guy got off not having to serve. So,
this is Silver Shinbone.
Silver Shinbone. Yeah, he plays a hero cop who has lead in his shin from, and anyway, they apparently they didn't want to cast him because he was a well-known homosexual and in the Hollywood scene, and they're like, everyone's gonna know this guy's gay. And when I watched it the first time, I was like, this guy's so coded gay that when they didn't go that direction, because one of the things that's interesting to me about noir is often what they won't say,
right?
Because of the Hays Code and whatnot, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the character was like, oh no, he's supposed to be playing a straight guy in this film.
Yeah, and I really think that age difference works incredibly well. Like, I don't know if that character is supposed to be that much older.
Well, the interesting thing is they were going to, like I said, they're going to cast Laird Krieger in this role, and I don't know if you know him, but he was one of these guys who was like 33 or 34 or something. But he looked way older than he was, so they would cast him because he had all this energy, but he was this like gigantic kind of beefy guy, and for whatever reason they decided to cast Clifton Webb instead.
Yeah, I mean he's that age I think that really solidifies his character a lot, like the way he treats her and the way he kind of makes up this narrative of how they're an item. And I mean, I think from her point of view, they're never an item.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I when you say it out loud, I would agree. Mm-hmm. I'd never really thought of all the times I've watched it before. He talks about like they have their Tuesdays and Fridays together and all of that, but she might just be hanging out with this kindly gentleman who's taken her under his wing.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, and it may be kind of one of the maybe not flaws of the movie, but one of the aspects that didn't really quite work for me was there's a lot of obsession in here, but it's kind of hard to. I mean, there's a lot of people are obsessed with her. I don't know. I don't quite know if it works with Dana Andrews. Like, I never really, he's obsessed with her because we're kind of told that he is.
It's a quick jump.
Yeah, it really is. But man, I mean, watching this the first time, the reveal, because I had no idea where this movie was going and what it's about. When he falls asleep in her apartment and wakes up and she's there, I was truly surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, you think you're watching a movie that's kind of doing the Citizen Kane thing. Of, we're talking about someone who's dead. There's been a body. Everyone's, both kind of mourning her, but really everyone's covering their ass at this point. And so you can't, but everyone's still talking about her because of their various obsessions. So just to go through them real fast, you have Lydecker, who we just talked about, and then Dana Andrews, who is the police officer, who there's this painting they made of Gene Tierney. So apparently this was actually a photograph they blew up because they were like, we're never going to get it right, actually, in the amount of time we've got. There had been several days or weeks of filming done that basically all got thrown out. Otto Preminger wasn't originally slated to direct it. He was going to produce it because he had some bad blood with Zanuck. And then Zanuck and he both decided the dailies were so bad, they fired the director. And Preminger, who always wanted to direct it, stepped in and took it over and threw everything out, the sets, costumes, everything. And they blew up this photo and basically smeared it with Vaseline or something to make it look like an oil painting.
Oh, crazy. Well, it looks exactly like an oil painting. Good job.
Yeah, and so and apparently you can see it in a few other movies from like 10 years after that, of like in various films, like they'll have it in the background of various sets.
Oh,
so,
wild.
Yeah, because I was trying to find like what happened to this painting, thinking it was a painting, and it was like, well, one, it was never a painting, and two, it disappeared into backlot land. So I'm sure somebody has it somewhere in some mansion somewhere in LA at this point.
I hope so.
So yeah, you have Dana Andrews, who in finding out about her, like you said, doesn't entirely tie together super well. He just kind of he keeps going to her apartment over and over and kind of walking around and kind of drinking her scotch.
And I love his little baseball game.
Yeah.
That he
you want to
plays.
talk about that a little bit?
Well, I thought that was such a nice little character touch, and he's also everybody's really, really good in this movie. Which, I don't know, for better or for worse, I tend not to think of older films having that sort of nuance in them. Like, the way he's walking through and like flipping his keys and things like that, I thought there were all these really wonderful little character touches throughout that. Yeah, but the his little baseball game that he plays, which I guess he really uses to annoy people almost more than anything. There's this scene where I think it's Lydecker talks about how infuriating it is that he's playing this game, and Dana Andrews' character says, well, it calms me down. But he's a really good, interesting detective. And the second watch, I really wondered how much he knew or had formulated before the film starts, which I don't really have an opinion on it, and I don't know quite yet how much. But I thought that was these neat little like character motivations and movements.
Yeah, I from what he might have known ahead of time, and this will kind of lead us into the other person with an obsession, and that would be Vincent Price is in this film, and before Vincent Price became this like master of horror, he was in this like in the 40s and like early 50s. He had this window where he was actually playing like a genial, often not dumb, but just kind of like not so with it sort of guy. Like there's another movie called His Kind of Woman with Robert Mitchum and I almost said Rosalind Russell. That's not right. It's Jane Russell. And he plays a Hollywood actor whose career is on the decline, and he really wants to do like Shakespeare and things like that. And he's amazing in that movie. You can tell he's having the time of his life in that movie. And so, yeah, it's just this weird window before he slipped somehow backward into doing like these Roger Corman movies and all that, and all the other horror things that you kind of know him from.
Yeah, I'd never seen him in a role like this and was just taken with him. He's like such a nice, dopey guy who just kind of wants what's best and is not bad. And he's this character that comes from money, but now has run out of money. And when he talks about, trying to get a job, like, you really sympathize. Like, I really sympathize for him. I was like, oh, this poor guy. He's like a sweet guy. And then when he talks about how when people realize he's out of money, like all his old society friends start like kind of dropping him off and like not associating with him. And his relation to his kind of relation and affection to Laura is interesting, especially compared to what's Laura's aunt's name?
Oh, Anne. That's all I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, she has a kind of younger aunt who's in the scene who is very interested in Price's character, Shelby. And they're probably sleeping together. Shelby's definitely sleeping with lots of people in this movie.
Yeah, he really is. And speaking of things that they don't say, I mean, I forget, I should have written down what some of the lines were, but there's lines towards the end of the movie where she's talking to who's she talking to? I forget if she's talking to either Dana Andrews or Clifton Webb, but she uses some term where Vincent Price's affectation is slightly homosexual, but she has some line that really kind of solidifies that. At least it did for me. That she may say something to the effect of, he has certain peculiarities or something like this, but that made their relationship to me really interesting too, because it's almost like she doesn't seem to have anybody in the world, and so she kind of latches onto this guy who she kind of assumes maybe is never going to find his like little niche in the world also. And I thought I like her going after him for that reason. I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And she has some great lines too. So she's kind of the fourth person with an obsession, because her obsession is, and she says, like, it's not that I didn't think about killing Laura. It's just that I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating thing to say. I mean, to say out, she doesn't say it to the detective, but she says it actually to Laura's face. Of course I thought about it. I mean, you were in my way, essentially. I'm trying to get this guy. It's my shot at this. When Laura does return, she returns almost exactly at the halfway mark of this movie. The movie's completely bifurcated. There are two parts. There's the part where Dana Andrews falls asleep and he wakes up, and when you watch it the first time, you're not sure if he's dreaming or not, because the movie's already pretty dreamy to begin with, and everyone talks about Laura as if she's a figment of their imagination to begin with, and then here she is. She's wearing a terrible hat. For some reason, the costuming in this movie is impeccable except for Laura's headwear, which I've never seen that style in another movie, and they decided for the movie she was going to have these very floppy, almost like Gorton's fisherman caps she was going to wear.
Right, that is exactly about how I was going to describe it. It's like somebody had melted one of those caps on top of her head.
And there's a bit to Laura kind of being aware that everyone thinks of her as not being herself, and maybe that's why Dana Andrews' detective is the closest to someone to actually see her for what she is. But there's no real foundation for why that would be in the context of the movie. We're more or less left to infer that. But yeah, I mean, it's really early in noir for that movement, but it's not afraid to have characters who are duplicitous and terrible, and everyone in it has other motivations. Even our detective, although he's doing it for the reasons of justice or what have you, is constantly messing with people, and you never really know what anyone's saying at any one time in this movie, whether or not it's actually true, including Laura. She returns from this camping trip she's been on, or out in her cabin, and everything she says sounds like a fib or a fabrication. And he's like, well, you're smart enough that you would have a reason, you should say that, but you're also smart enough to have actually set up all of the things that you said you did, so they might all be quasi true. So it's an interesting. She's not a femme fatale.
No, definitely not.
She's not out trying to sink anybody or get anything out of anybody. All she wants is to just figure out how to get back to where she was on Friday, where she left.
Right.
She leaves to go to this country house because she's confused about whether or not to marry Shelby, which she's supposed to do on a Thursday, because I guess people marry in the middle of the week. in 1944.
Yeah.
But she's pretty sure she shouldn't because he's seeing this woman named Linda Redfern. Is that the right name?
I thought it was Diane.
Diane. It might be Diane Redfern. Everyone's either named Linda or Diane in 1944.
I did think it was pretty interesting because when I think of noir, I think of PIs.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting that this guy was an actual cop.
This is going to be interesting to do noir with you if you think it's all PIs.
Indeed, it will be. Yeah, I tend to think of kind of the noir hero is like half a foot outside of the law, whereas this guy's very, very entrenched. I mean, he's a lieutenant. I think he's a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
But that surprised me a little. I always think of, I guess, like Philip Marlowe, right? Because he's a private eye.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Same spade. Same thing. And so I think that, in kind of talking about the bigger noir, it gives us kind of an opportunity to talk about, like, everyone kind of has this idea of, like, I get it, they're shooting through, like, blinds and there's lots of shadow. And
I was very impressed when the blinds on The Breakfast popped up. Because there's blinds on The Breakfast all in one scene, and I was over the moon.
And this is actually a little bit before you start. You're starting to get some of that, the kind of noir, what you think of as far as the look and feel, the kind of like it's when you start getting like James Wong Howe working on these films, you start getting John Alton working on these films, you start getting the, like, even if the movie's not great, it's just beautiful. You think of like the big combo and like the shot of them standing in the open doorway of the warehouse, and as far as like being detectives, there was a lot of the interesting thing about that is a lot of that stuff comes out of Hammett or Chandler, who predate the whole noir movement. They were finally adapting some of, well, Chandler was kind of contemporaneous more with the noir movement, but and as they were adapting his books kind of as they were coming out, within a year or two of them coming out, he ended up kind of getting folded in, and of course he co-wrote Double Indemnity, but you start getting into kind of all of these other genres. You do have PIs, but you definitely have cops who basically get pressed beyond the rule of their job most of the time, unless it's one of these like Law and Order noirs where it's like, we're going to have, I just watched one where Estes Kefauver, who was a senator, was like at the beginning of it, like introing this movie to tell you about how important like this part of the law, the Treasury Department was. So you were following, it was called T-Men, and you're following the T-Men through the film. And so, I'm getting confused because I watched like 3 movies in a row like 2 weeks ago. So it might have been not T-Men, but then you also have movies about, guys breaking out of prison. You have Double Indemnity, which is about an insurance detective. He's kind of a detective, sort of. And so it does end up getting kind of all over the map. So if you're locked into noir thinking it's going to be kind of one thing, it ends up becoming kind of a... Because at the end of the day, you said, well, I like these movies about obsession. And I was like, well, that's actually the definition of noir to me.
I think kind of for me it is too. And when we first started talking about this, I kind of started making notes about, well, what do I think when I think of noir? Because I think it's hard to pin down any like one definition of what it is, and then that kind of took me to, well, what are the ones that I go after? Like, what do I find interesting? And it's not so much the Law and Order ones, but it is it really is the obsession. I mean, I like these stories about what kind of person and what makes that person like turn that corner that you can't turn back around. Like, I mean, it's almost like you turn the corner and you fall down a stairway.
Yeah, that's what Double Indemnity is, right? That's You've seen, I'm assuming, the one.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. I have to check.
I can stay.
But I mean, I think that's why everyone thinks of it as being well, it's a detective sort of.
Right.
It's kind of shot in that the shadows of Los Angeles. They even use elevation in different ways in the movie, which to me is always a cool thing that they do, because this is all shot on like Fox Studio sets.
Oh yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah, and it's like they never really leave the soundstage, and I think that's both also a product of cost control during World War II. But yeah, they're lavish sets, but there's essentially like 5 locations in this entire movie. Like, yeah, they're not like wandering the streets of New York in this thing. But yeah, I think that's why you get back to like Double Indemnity and how he falls for the wrong woman and makes a terrible decision, and kind of where that leads him, right up to the finale of the movie. And I think with this one, it is these kind of interesting angles of obsession. I don't think anyone's going to think Waldo Lydeker's any kind of protagonist, except for he's a likable scoundrel. It's like I would rather be on his team than be not on his team.
Yeah, and I mean his dialogue is so whip smart. I mean it's so well written. I mean I was trying to remember some of these lines about. Oh my god! And I guess this one wasn't his line about. I like murder victims have no claim on privacy. I thought it was good where everybody's like just like pouring through his letters, and I love, is it Bessie or Betsy, the domestic? And she's proud of it.
She shows up in a lot of movies as the domestic.
Okay, yeah. I figure she's got the look down for that. What was it about? Something about his pen. Oh, his writing is what. Something like a quill dipped in venom, just like these little lines that are just like, oh, these are really good lines. Like,
to me, it's almost an interesting throwback because it generationally places him both with like he dines every day at the Algonquin Hotel, which of course then you have to think of the Round Table and Dorothy Parker and these people who just said horrible things all the time that were very, very clever. And so I think they were playing on that a bit. Apparently he was based a little bit on someone named like Wolcott or something like that, who was a real columnist. There was somebody who was essentially very similar to this character in real life at one point. Probably not with all the political clout and all of that he was claiming in the movie, but certainly you can envision in an era where everyone buys the same paper and everyone's kind of reading the same people. You can imagine like your favorite blogger, and if everyone actually bothered to read that person, how popular that person would become, and how powerful, really. And he's an interesting dandy in that he says, well, I am more. Why wouldn't I be self-absorbed? I'm more interesting than anyone else I've ever met.
Oh yeah. I mean, rewatching it, I like when he first meets Dana Andrews, and he realizes Dana Andrews is this detective that he's written about, and they have this little back and forth about, well, Dana Andrews saying that's not really what happened, and Lydecker saying, well, but my version is better.
Yeah.
So that's what I wrote. My version is better. And that really kind of clued me in this second time around how, I mean, he just goes around and kind of makes up like what he wants to believe. He just tries to turn it into a reality, which I thought was neat.
So apparently, I was doing lots of reading of trivia last night about this movie. There was a scene that was cut where Laura tells Dana Andrews when he's like, well, you came to him in the Algonquin Hotel, and she says, oh, that's not what happened.
Oh,
I was actually a vagrant or something, and he that's why I like him so much. He pulled me out of the gutter, and he's completely made me. And so even in his version, she had already had a start. She was already, raw material. She was pure raw material when he actually found her, but like a little more refined in his version.
Oh, that is.
But someone they watched when Preminger was showing it to somebody, they were like, "You got to cut that scene because it's just confusing, honestly." But I think from everything you're saying, like, right, he does have this other version of reality he's living in. And yeah, it would have put a definitely a different spin on the whole movie. So
yeah, that's a very interesting scene to cut because that's pretty impactful. Like that kind of changes the way you would think about, especially everything that he has to say, kind of compared with that scene where.
I was trying to be careful talking about these supposedly cut scenes because who knows if it's apocryphal or not. Mm-hmm. But I do think it probably really happened, and because it's so relevant to everything you've been bringing up. What did you think of Gene Tierney in this movie?
Yeah, I liked her a lot, and I started looking at everything that she's done, and. This may be blasphemous, but I think this is the only thing I've seen her in.
Okay. Yeah, I honestly have not seen her in that many movies.
I thought she was good. Interestingly, the first time I watched it, I thought kind of the weak links were her and Dana Andrews, but I really liked him a lot the second time. Mm-hmm. I was going through it. Which kind of led me. One of the notes that I wrote down while watching it the first time is Laura worth all this obsession? And I don't know. I was struck how everybody's obsessed with her in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure I see it. It didn't bring down the movie for me in any way. But what do you think? Do you think she's worth everybody?
I think occasionally you run up against something that's a product of its time, or a product of overly efficient filmmaking in the studios. And they do a lot more telling than showing. Mm-hmm. You get Bessie saying, who's also obsessed with her, the domestic, saying, I would scrub her floors even if she didn't pay me. She's so kind, she's so generous, but we're only hearing it. We're being told that by Bessie. We're not seeing what she does, except for there is one scene between she and Bessie where she is kind to her, which also makes you wonder, like, what has Bessie's life been like? She met Laura. Does not sound good. And there's a lot hung on Gene Tierney's, as it had read it described as imperfect beauty. She was not. I'm trying to think of like Grace Kelly, who I guess would be years later, but Grace Kelly I almost can't keep in my head when I try and think of what she looks like, because it's just kind of oval shaped face and blonde hair. That's all I can really think of. But I can think of what Gene Tierney looks like, because she's not just attractive, she's stunning. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting face that you're looking at in this painting that everyone's kind of keeps returning to and kind of looking at. And I do wonder what the movie would have been had she not returned. It is based on a novel. And apparently the novel was written in 4 or 5 parts, and it kept changing POVs throughout. Oh. In the movie at one point, because it starts with Lydeker's voiceover, like, I'll never forget that weekend where Laura died, and apparently it was supposed to switch then to Dana Andrews, and then for the last bit switch to Laura from like a voiceover from her. And of course people don't love voiceovers, so they cut all of that. But do I think she's worth it? I think a lot of people have projected onto a blank slate. They've projected onto this painting that we've got, and that's kind of what we've got to work with. And so it's hard to know.
I like that.
Interestingly, I almost asked to pair this with another movie because they're so similar. You can tell it's a ripoff of Laura. A few years later, they made a movie called The Unsuspected. And it's about Claude Rains plays a radio host who does like mystery stories, and his ward dies, and her painting is hanging over the fireplace, and she returns a third of the way through the movie. And it's more pulpy than this. This is more of like a parlor mystery sort of thing. And Unsuspected's more of like, we're going to put some edges on this thing. We're going to throw Audrey Totter into it. And have a bunch of alcoholics running around. So it's a different movie, but it's one worth us visiting at some point down the road when we want to go down that way and return to talking about Laura. But it's I think that happens a lot with there's kind of the virgin whore complex in noir, where there's the femme fatale, and then back home there's the good girl the guy should be going for. There's always the girl next door, or the wife, or who's the homebody, and there's a movie. God, boy, I can't remember the name of it right now. This is the problem with drinking rye and doing this. It's a Glenn Ford movie with Gloria Graham, and you guys can do your own 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon and figure it out. But that definitely has the you have Gloria Graham shimmying over here, and then you have the wife with the ponytail, making steaks at home and worrying about the household budget, and Glenn Ford kind of in the middle of all of that.
It wasn't Out of the Past very much like that. There's the woman from Out of the Past, and then the other one, the nice
right.
one.
Yeah. I mean, it's and it's hard for sometimes, I think, but those women are always kind of blank slates, the good girls in those movies, and the closest we have to a femme fatale in this is Aunt Anne. Who's playing angles and has her own agenda, but she's just not to the forefront. She's a sub character of a sub character.
Yeah, and she's. I was trying to remember what else I've seen her in, but
apparently she has the royal title of Dame.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But she was great. Everybody's great in this movie. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I was so surprised watching it. Like, holy moly, this performance is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you kind of get used to how people acted during this era, and get more kind of used to what were the social norms of the era, you do start realizing like there's a lot of strong performances or quirky or whatever that aren't immediately obvious if you're like, oh, this is so stagey, this is so like before Marlon Brando, and I'm so used to watching older movies because I probably watch for every 2 new movies 1 old movie at this point. And I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff. There's people that I really look forward to seeing in movies. Like even Victor Mature, I was writing up a thing about him recently. I was like, I don't know why people talk badly about him. He's pretty good. I was watching Kiss of Death, which I highly recommend.
Oh yes, I have seen that one.
Yeah.
Richard Widmark, right?
Yeah.
I was looking at that and I was thinking about Richard Widmark, and I think he feels so different. I mean, he feels so dangerous. That guy does. That
character set forward what everyone was going to imitate until today, straight through like Joaquin Phoenix winning the Oscar. I'm not exaggerating there. He set all of that in motion.
I think one of my notes, because I thought about Richard Widmark while watching this, was, did Richard Widmark change everything? At least as far as like this kind of your lead in that. Because if I'm thinking of the right movie,
The one where he throws someone's mother down the stairs in a wheelchair. Yeah. You're thinking of the right movie.
Yeah. You're like, geez, this guy.
The first time I saw that movie, and not to turn this into a Kiss of Death podcast, because I just watched Kiss of Death last week. It's traumatic to watch that movie, because it looks like an old black and white movie, and then this crazy stuff happens in it. And it's kind of like when you watch Psycho for the first time, and you're like, oh, everything came from this. We don't have anything that happened in horror thrillers unless we have this movie. And I feel like that about Kiss of Death, of like, you don't have Joe Pesci unless you have Richard Widmark. You don't have like anyone who you have to stay close to so they don't kill you. As you see in like a lot of crime movies, you see in a lot of kind of thrillers and noir, and that and Anne Savage and Detour.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, Detour.
Yeah, well, we can detour into Detour anytime you want.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic film.
But yeah, I mean, I think you have all these interesting movies in this period, and this one's by far like the most. You can feel the studio. It is a studio movie. It is not like when you get into like, here's some random, Poverty Row studio trying to make something that someone else is going to buy, like Gun Crazy.
Yeah.
And it's got name actors, and it's got elegant sets, and we haven't even talked about the Laura theme yet. It has a score that's not just music that they borrowed from somewhere. Which apparently the Laura theme, it's just her favorite song that they keep playing, and people are like, oh, don't play that, it reminds me of her so. But apparently that became like a big, like, it was kind of the My Heart Will Go On of it, or whatever that Celine Dion song is of its day. Apparently that became a huge single. Like Sinatra covered it. They added Johnny Mercer added lyrics. And I listened to it last night on YouTube, and I'll link to it on SoundCloud and on the blog. But the lyrics don't really kick in for a while, so I kept waiting for Sinatra to start singing. And I was like, "Right about a minute, Frank. Speed it up a little bit." But yeah, it is a beautiful song, and I read Rosalind Russell read the script and turned it down because she didn't think the part of Laura was big enough. They said, well, they handed me the script, not the score.
Oh.
Very charming.
So another thing I was pretty struck by, especially for such a kind of bright-looking movie, is the fact that Diane is shot point blank in the face with a shotgun. I was not expecting... From starting with 20th Century Fox fanfare to such a graphic, gruesome death.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really brought some gravity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so you get this idea of whoever did it was looking to obliterate Laura at this point, and succeeded in doing so, and to the fact that Diane Redfern... Okay, so we need to talk about this too. So the reason they don't know that they think that Laura's dead is Shelby, who plays around, probably, as we said, playing both sides of the bench, is playing around with some model named Diane Redfern, but he's going to break up with her 5 days before he's supposed to get married, and he doesn't want to bring her to his place, like, because you want neutral territory when you're breaking up with someone. I understand, and he doesn't want to ghost her or do any of the things that kids do today.
No.
Whatever they call it. You don't want to just send a text. He wants to be a gentleman and do it face to face, but he knows not to do it in his hotel room, and he knows not to do it at her place, where she may know where the pots and pans to throw might be. So he takes her instead, in theory, to Laura's house or apartment. But there's this niggling detail. She's wearing Laura's lingerie when she's shot, or not. They don't. It's not lingerie. They keep saying negligee
like
or pajamas. So I don't honestly know if it was like silk pajamas, but I think the idea is we were to understand it was something lacy.
Right.
So yeah, she is wearing another woman's delicate things at the time of her death. So yeah, she is shot in, she opens the door, it's dark, she gets shot in the face by whomever, turns out to be Waldo. But yeah, it's yeah, I mean, you do run into that from, here and there in this era where they kind of, if they're gonna just someone died horribly, they kind of do the play Medea, not the popular film series Medea, but where they describe something happening off stage, right? It's like, this occurred, just understand we're going to talk about someone got shot in the face, but you're not going to see a body, you're not going to see a corpse in any way, shape, or form, not even going to see a tape outline and the blood splatter. All we get is the description, and then how the housekeeper reacts to what she has seen. And yeah, I think that happens a bit. They weren't afraid. I guess they got that past the Hays Code of like, if we just say the word shotgun to the face, it's okay. Somehow. Yeah,
that definitely surprised me that it was so.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the big things of watching movies from this era is like, yeah, the Hays Code was in effect, but people were still people, and so you kind of like occasionally look at something where they say something, but it's really about reading between the lines of what they don't say. So,
I did try to find what was it, Black Pony Scotch.
I assume that was made up because they couldn't actually name like a real Scotch, could they? That was a trashy Scotch.
No, probably not. But I think somebody does make, yes, Black Pony Scotch.
Oh, there's really one. Well, we gotta find some.
We'll go blind trying.
$7 a bottle.
This is a case.
This is gonna be good. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what Shelby was up to with his model on that night, but I think we can all assume he was not breaking up. So, you got anything else on the movie?
No. We should have mentioned at the top that we have been podcasting from baths like Lidecker, where he's in the beginning. I mean, we each have our own.
I assume people would hear the water while we were doing it.
I perhaps not, but we are each in our own bathtub at this point.
Yes, Lidecker has this power play that they use at the end. So he has right off his living room another living room that's got a gigantic bathtub that he sits in while he does his work.
He's got his little typewriter, right?
Yeah, he's got a fold-away table with a typewriter on it, and yeah, he does this power move when Dana Andrews comes to interview him at the beginning, where he just stands up.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. But he said, another bit of trivia, he said that was the first time I realized I was no longer a young romantic lead. Because he was a stage actor. He was, he had whatever, you see yourself. I am, when I look in the mirror, still a handsome 25-year-old. And he was like, oh my God, that's what I actually look like.
No. Yes. Like a little Mr. Burns body there.
Yeah. But, the horse was out of the barn and they'd already filmed him, and it was going to be in the movie.
Yeah, but man, what a tub.
Yeah, he said apparently Dana Andrews was waiting for him with a bottle of scotch.
Black Pony Scotch.
Anyway, you got anything else?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming and doing this. This has been a blast, and we'll find another movie, and we'll do either a new noir or an old noir. I'd like to mix it up because I haven't watched a lot of the newer stuff. You have Gemini on the table.
I do. I was trying to think of kind of modern counterparts to this, and I that's why I brought Gemini. After I watched this, I watched about half of Under the Silver Lake. and then I watched about half of Gemini,
Yeah.
and then fell asleep.
I'm not sure if that's a strong recommendation.
Oh,
sir.
it is. I love both of these.
Okay.
films.
I actually really wanted to see Gemini when it came out in the theater, but I was work tripping all that summer, so I never saw it. Yeah, so one of the things that I think, and I'll just say this, and I'll talk about it again when we actually talk about this movie or another one, is for all of the kind of ... elliptical stuff that they do in noir of this era, where you kind of have to read between the lines, and that's part of the fun or the sexiness or whatever, is you get into the 90s in Fatal Attraction's a noir, right? And I mean that they are not shying away anymore from what they're showing at this point.
No.
And so that was kind of the 90s, and I feel like now there's this kind of push to get back to, like, with things like what I've seen, heard and read about Gemini and Under the Silver Lake,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, is either kind of this deconstruction of those ideas, or just doing it more straight, or not necessarily. I mean, you might have a nipple pop up on screen or something like that, but it's there was just a period in the 90s where I was like, there is no line anymore between this and what's happening on, like, Red Shoe Diaries.
No, the erotic thriller really.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, if you think about something like The Big Sleep, we were talking about Dorothy Malone earlier this week. It's like, as if you didn't just see, them fading to black as they're toasting each other, however that scene plays out. It's like, nope, we're going to go ahead and show that. We know what the people want. Yeah. And it's like, it's better sometimes if you just leave it to people's imagination. We can all just kind of elbow each other knowing what just happened. Mm-hmm. We don't need to sit there for 2 minutes going, I wonder how they filmed that.
Why is she putting her hair up?
But yeah. Anyway, thanks so much again, and I will toast you once again, sir.
Indeed.
And that was Bone Snapper Straight Rye Whiskey, and I'm a fan.
Yeah, it's tasty.
Any parting words? Any capper here? Any place people can find you, should look for you? Or you got any other business people should know about?
I don't. I don't.
You don't want them to follow you on social media? You don't want to become a social media star?
I think Twitter is @RobotNerve.
Mm-hmm.
And Instagram, I believe, is just my name, Justin Lincoln. It's 90% pictures of my child doing stupid things.
Yeah, so don't follow that, or the FBI will follow you.
Right, exactly. It's a trap.
All right, thanks so much, Justin.
Thank you.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time. God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.